It's a magical world. Let's go exploring. Words spoken by Calvin in Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes in what I've always taken to be the final of the collections of those comics, but I don't actually know for certain. Either way, it's a sentiment that I felt may possibly encapsulate what's going to be talked about today. Hello and welcome to the Ragnarök Chronicles. My name is Dominic, and if you haven't seen the introductory video, this is a channel where I'm just going to break down some different elements within the series of books I'm writing, that being the Ragnarök Chronicles. Today I want to look at the structure of the multiverse that these books are set within, because it is different to what you may usually think of when you think of the universe or indeed the multiverse. Mine is made up of four main parts: the Alpha Realm, the Beta Realm, the Outer Region, and the Inner Region. There is technically a fifth plane, which exists between the Alpha Realm and the Inner Region. I'll explain again about those two in more detail in a moment, but as nothing really lives there, it kind of just exists as a... it's quite literally essentially caused by friction between the two coinciding with each other. It's just a fifth layer that some people sometimes interact with, but not really. We as humans on Earth live in the Alpha Realm, which exists as kind of these bubble universes all existing in a chain. If you're going to potentially think of like an analogy of a living organism, so our universes within the Alpha Realm are cells. Outside of these cells, and kind of the gaps, is then the Outer Region. These are where higher plane beings, such as the Brethren Lords, live. Then, within the Alpha Realm, you have the Inner Region. I say within, it's kind of occupying the same space. As you may know, the majority of an atom is empty space. An analogy that I like, well, I don't know if it's perfectly accurate, but it's one I like, is that if you were to scale up an atom to the size of the Titanic, the nucleus would be the size of a raspberry. So most of an atom is empty space, from our perspective at least. There are actually other atoms just out of phase with ours, existing in that same gap. Again, so you've literally got the atoms trying to coexist, overlapping with each other. But because of different types of atoms, we can't perceive each other. And again, this is where the friction happens, where that fifth layer occurs. So that's the Inner Region. It's harder to access from the other three planes of existence. Like, you can get there, but most people don't bother. It's kind of just tucked away inside the Alpha Realm. And then finally, you've got the Beta Realm, which is its own pocket thing, right at the edge of the multiverse. And it's a lingering remnant of the reality that came before what we would perceive as the Big Bang, one of the Big Bangs, at least. Next, just as each part of the multiverse occupies its own space, they also have slightly different rules determining how time works, how it's perceived. In the Outer Region and the Beta Realm, they experience time exactly as we think we do here, as just some linear progression of one event to the next, and we're just moving through it. Although, perhaps that's not the best way to describe it, because by comparison, the way that time actually works in the Alpha Realm for our plane of existence and the Inner Region is more like stop-motion film. I mentioned how in the Alpha Realm, and then also by proxy the Inner Region, because they occupy the same space, more or less, they exist within bubble realities. Well, naturally, these bubble realities, these universes, are static. There is no inherent motion within them. What happens is that throughout the chain, if you want to think about it, of universes, each one is slightly different to the next. Only minutely different, but it's determined by some kind of algorithm within nature of reality itself that determines if this was a progression of events, then each person, each individual thing would be most likely to do this thing next. So you end up with these slight differences, and then our souls, our consciousnesses, are Beaureia energy, as it would be officially known within this multiverse, as they then move in waves between all of the universes. From their perspective, it now seems and feels like we're just moving fluidly in a way that, again, is not surprising to us. There may be the odd hiccup in what the universe predicts should happen next here and there, but for the most part, it all works. It's kind of, we have free will, but everything is also predetermined. Because it's predetermined based on what we would choose to do with free will. Again, the same is happening within the inner region as well, except that theirs happens to run backwards. So the first universe in the chain for the Alpha Realm occupies more or less the same space as the last universe in the inner region, and vice versa at the other end of the chain, and then they loop back around to the beginning. Now, in theory, whether it was someone coming from the outer region into the Alpha Realm, or someone within the Alpha Realm and the algorithm kind of predicted that they would invent such a thing, there is a capacity for people to be time travellers, to jump themselves from one universe to a different one in the chain. And then once there, again, based on what they'll be most likely to do, they could change the course of events. What this would result in is new universes spawning to account for that new history, which it will try to keep on more or less the same course. It will try to revert that new timeline back into what the original one was, like it was just a detour. Of course, some changes are just too irrecoverable, whatever. However, but yeah, that's how in theory time travel will work. You could go to a different universe, a different bubble universe, thus reintegrate yourself back into the flow of time and change something, create new universes, which will then try to return back to the original. To be clear, it's not like there's one wave of souls of Beaureia energy going around. There's a perpetual flow of waves, one after the other, going through all of them. Once kind of one of these detours, these new chain of universes has been properly established. I don't have any props to this with. Okay, let's just say you had some original branch and some new branch now came off this way. Any of these souls that were the Beaureia energy that were currently going through the original versions, they will continue on through the loop as they were. They won't experience any changes. But any souls that are then coming through the flow, now reaching that point, they will go down the diverted path. And so eventually, once kind of the whole cycle's run its way through, everyone is now going through the diverted path. No one is going through the original anymore. At that point, those universes become dormant. They enter a state that could be referred to as Hypobeaureia, like hypothermia, because there's a lack of Beaureia energy going through them. They become more or less dead. And with this in mind, again, because the Alpha Realm and Inner Region are so connected, if, say, someone caused a new spawn of universes in the Alpha Realm, those new universes would also contain new Inner Region, even if nothing happened in the Inner Region that would have warranted new universes either. It's just those new universes would be identical to the old ones. And vice versa, someone could change something in the Inner Region, and that would then spawn a new Alpha Realm, even if to go with it, even if nothing happened in the Alpha Realm that would warrant a new timeline in that regard. That's how everything is supposed to work anyway, so long as no one does anything that might tamper or damage the underlying algorithm structure of that plane of reality. I'm sure no one's going to do that. Now, as I say, obviously then each individual universe is static, nothing's happening in it. That is unless someone from, say, the outer region comes in and interferes. Due to an event that happened early on in the multiverse's history, which, while it's not like a massive, shocking spoiler for any future story, just because it's not revealed in any of the first books, I'm going to choose to not divulge it now. But something that happened meant that beings from the outer region, such as the Brethren Lords, they cannot naturally survive in the reality of the Alpha Realm. It's toxic to them. They need to generate a pocket of outer region reality that they can inhabit, which, of course, because it's a pocket, a bubble, they aren't going along with the flow of time, they're just stuck within that moment. So they can enter the outer realm, but just within a single instance. This at least is what is predominantly the case when they use a kind of device whose name would translate into English as hexagon, because it consists of 6 arrays which generate the bubble of outer region reality. Might as well say this here, because why not? I'm talking about the hexagons, they're not going to get their own video. The reason why it's specifically a hexagon, it doesn't necessarily have to be 6 arrays, but again, early on in the Multiverse's history, the Brethren Lords came upon a crucible just floating through the void, which was like a hexagonal prism, I guess you could call it, and they liked the shape, and so they just took it with them and they incorporated it into that design. There is also another device, which again, if you were to translate the name, it would translate as the Watch, which does actually allow them to carry forward in the flow of time while still in a bubble of outer region reality, but there's only one of those. They haven't been able to replicate it, and it's being specially used in a certain location, so it's not something they can just pick up and use for their own use for the most part when they're doing whatever they're doing in terms of these books. If they appear on Earth or so forth in these books, it's going to be within a hexagon. Now, just as they, therefore, can come from the outer region to the alpha realm, so too, in theory, if you had the right technology, could someone who originates from the alpha realm enter the outer region. When they do this, you're essentially going from being part of a stop-motion chain into something which now has full autonomy. So when you go through the skin of our reality, of our universe, you suddenly kind of form this more autonomous body, which that one instance of a soul is now inhabiting and moving around with. Because the chain of universes in the alpha realm now doesn't know what you're doing out there, or what's going to have happened to you to affect your experiences, it essentially stores every other version of your soul in a buffer, ending at that universe. Every universe after that point in the chain now kind of will have instead a proto-version of you, which kind of estimates what you might do in those circumstances. But it won't be until you return to the outer realm from the outer region that knows, okay, this person experienced this thing, they now know this stuff, they think this way, they would now behave this way as a result. As soon as it has that information and you go back in, those proto-universes, those proto-versions of you, will now solidify in a fixed form, and now all of these souls can now continue along their way. If you didn't return, say if you died out in the outer region, or you just stayed out there for way too long, and it would have to be an extreme period of time, eventually too many souls would get stuck in the buffer, and there would be a soul overload. Essentially, all of that energy being bottled up would erupt outwards, and who knows what would happen then. The reason why there's a buffer in turn is just so that you don't have infinite versions of this one person suddenly spawning in the outer region. Because again, the outer region is independent of the time that's going on in the alpha realm. It's kind of doing its own thing. So otherwise, from their perspective, you would just have an infinite number of this one person coming out perpetually into them, which wouldn't do anyone any kind of favours. So, whether you left and came back, or, as is in the case of most people, stayed within the alpha realm time continuum, you will go on living your life and eventually, naturally, die. At this point, your Beaureia energy, or your soul, will move on to inhabit something called the Knellosseum, otherwise referred to as the Silent Satellites, just as a kind of nickname. During which period you will be, by some definition, dead. Because for the people in the alpha realm, eventually your soul will re-enter the universes, albeit in a different body. It's kind of like reincarnation. Your soul is never gone. You will continue living subsequently. But by our perception, we refer to it as dead because you are not part of that alpha realm for that period. You can have people fully being dead, like if in the outer region, for instance, if someone dies there's no silent satellites for them, that's it, they're gone. But say we can define dead just as not being part of the alpha realm for that period. Your soul enters these silent satellites, and while there's just kind of this simulation of a version of some kind of reality that the souls will just kind of inhabit until, let's say, there is a vacancy of a new body, of a new life form for them to enter. Now, it's not always strictly that, like, oh, if you're a human soul here, you're going to go on to be a human again. Usually that is how it works. But because through different periods of the universe, you are going to have fluctuations in the size of species, or just how many species exist in general, it's more first come, first serve on whatever's available. Right now, we exist in what they would refer to as the Meridian Age, because we are coming up to the exact halfway point in the timeline. Again, that history and that chain of universes. In the Meridian Age, it just so happens that there are more species alive in the universe than there are at any other point in history. But even so, you will go through periods where there just aren't that many species around. Because of the size of the universe, the chance that there's no other life there is minimal, but the chances of those sentient species coexisting, like at the same time, is also very small. We're probably going to miss each other. I mean, that's one of the arguments as to why we haven't come across extraterrestrial life in reality. That and the technology required to visit other worlds. It's very hard to justify the use of that technology, considering how much effort it would require. But anyway, let's say at the moment there are however many billions of humans on Earth, so there are plenty of new vacancies for souls to inhabit. And as the human population has grown, maybe to ensure that these bodies were filled, some souls that previously inhabited other species, whether they were earthly or not, I say, actually no, to fill the gap, you're now going to go into a human this time. However, maybe down the line, when the number of humans reduces again and they don't need as many going into human bodies, the system will say, actually, okay, we can put you over here on this different kind of species, or this different planet in general. So it always works out eventually. The Knellosseum in general is, strictly speaking, run by the Brethren Lords as well, but the system more or less runs itself. Now, I mentioned a moment ago about us being in the Meridian Age, in the middle. What about when we get to the end of the chain of universes, the end of the timeline, and it all loops back around again? Well, you have this creature, the Tentortex, which while all of the souls are technically within the silent satellites, the actual matter of reality gets consumed by this cosmically large creature and somewhat digested. The Tentortex would then kind of burrow its way from that last bubble universe into the bubble universe that was at the beginning and regurgitate or let out that matter in some way or another. But because of the process that matter has undergone while inside the Tentortex, it's now what we would think of as like the matter that was at the beginning of the universe. Just the photons and hydrogen and so forth, waiting to go through that process of development. So to be clear, there's kind of two distinct starts. There is what we would usually think of as the Big Bang, which is what would create the finitely sized bubble universe that everything fits into. Because again, in this reality, the universes are like bubbles. It's not expanding. When you look into... there is a level of expansion if you were to look like through the chain of events through the Alpha Realm. The galaxies are moving apart, but there is a finite boundary. When you look far enough, the reason why the stars that far away may start to look similar is not just not to do with the universe being infinite. It's because if you're looking that far, you are quite literally looking into an adjacent universe. You're looking at those exact same star systems, again, still massively large. But like, think of if it was just the observable universe, that was all that there was. There was nothing beyond the observable universe. It just repeats again. It doesn't exactly work because you can observe what's beyond. Whatever. Point is, the Big Bang creates these bubbles, this finite size, and then subsequently, the Tentortex comes through and adds all the matter into that space. It's then, as an asexual species, it then lays an egg, or it has some kind of offspring, and then throughout the entire history of the Alpha Realm, it will keep on always being one Tentortex, never fully growing to full size, full potential, until you get to the end again, and it keeps on looping around and around and around. And that's where babies come from, in an extended version. So, with that said and done then, quite literally back to the beginning, that is more or less how the multiverse works in the terms of my books. Obviously the majority, I don't know how it would actually work out, but not all of the books are going to require this level of understanding and explanation. A lot of them are just going to take place within the Alpha Realm, and the majority of people in the Alpha Realm don't realise that's the nature of reality. But in the instances of these first books, like Gift of the Manson, because we are dealing with the Brethren Lords who do exist outside of the Alpha Realm, this kind of understanding does come into play, does get reiterated and explained to make sure it's clear. But yeah, that's the kind of framework that we are operating within. Hopefully that all makes sense, and again, explained in the books. It probably is going to come up to an extent again here and there when I talk about other things such as the Brethren Lords specifically. But either way, I hope you found that interesting. As always, if you have any kind of questions or anything you want to talk about, just leave that in the comments below. And either way, until the next time I see you, just keep on telling stories.